Robert Williger, thanks so much for coming on to Talk Beliefs from your home in Florida, USA. You are a copywriter and marketing strategist, as well as a U.S. Army veteran who speaks out on social media about growing up in a Jewish community and the dangers of Orthodox Jewish belief. So how are you doing, Rob? I know you spend a lot of time speaking out on TikTok. Now, this has been a great resource for you in terms of activism. It's early days yet, but how has it been received?
Well, definitely, like as most things on social media, pretty mixed. I definitely have been able to connect with some others that are coming from the same type of background. But there also is this thing that people seem to think that just because somebody doesn't believe anymore, that they don't really know anything. And they'll come and tell you, oh, you should look at, you should go learn something. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, you don't get to invalidate my experience. But what has been nice is, being able to connect with even some of the groups that are still religious that are trying to reduce some of the harm in the religious community, like those advocating dealing with things like sexual abuse and the LGBTQ community. So it's been really nice to connect with those groups.
Well, for anyone who doesn't know, how would you best describe Jewish orthodoxy? What are the beliefs?
Orthodox Judaism takes a strict interpretation of the Torah, the Jewish holy book that is believed to have been given to Moses on Mount Sinai, in addition to a series of other laws created by the rabbis. And now, if you look at Judaism, it's really along a spectrum. And it goes from what actually humanistic Judaism that believes that it's all legend, but that there's a good cultural background to it, to Reform Judaism that believes in updating things, to conservative, and then you get to Orthodox. Now, all of this, like most things, are on a spectrum. It's not a straight line where it gets divided to here is this and this, but there are general boundaries. And where Orthodox comes in, all of them have a strict monotheistic belief. But where Orthodox Judaism differs is a very strict interpretation, meaning that there is going to be prayer literally 3 times a day. There is morning, afternoon, and evening prayers. You are going to be observing, keeping kosher, the Jewish dietary laws, which means that everything you eat, you need to make sure that it is either certified kosher or is a natural product. People are pretty familiar with a lot of the things, such as not eating pork, not eating shellfish, not eating meat and milk. But there also is a lot of little details, and pretty much everything in you throughout your day, you are focused on, is this the right thing? There's also, of course, a lot of rules regarding relations with opposite gender. I mean, if you get into the strict opinions, people won't even have physical contact, some to the extent that they will not even shake hands with someone of the opposite gender. Now, among Orthodoxy, I was what would be called modern Orthodox. I kept the kosher, I kept Shabbat, but I wasn't so strict on everything. The ultra-Orthodox that you see, the people with the black hats, the side curls coming down.
Yeah.
When you look at those people, some of them won't even own smartphones. They will not read a secular book. They have never gone to a movie. And so that's why I'm saying it's a spectrum. But where I was living in regular American society, working a job, but, kept these beliefs as far as what I ate, strict observance of the Sabbath from Friday night until Saturday night, no using any sort of electronics, no turning on lights, no working. So it really impacts every level of what you're doing on your daily life.
You saw my recent interview with ex-Orthodox Jew Dina Perler-Portnar, and were inspired to get in contact to tell your own story of leaving Jewish Orthodoxy. But before you take us on that journey, let's just go back to the beginning. Your story takes place all over the world, but it began in Chicago. Isn't that right?
Yes, I grew up in the Chicago area in a suburb originally called a suburb called Skokie, which was at the time a very Jewish suburb, not very religious, but was known as a Jewish. People actually might have heard of it because in the 1970s, the American Nazi Party actually wanted to do a march there that went to the Supreme Court. And the reason they actually targeted Skokie was specifically because of its high Jewish population and at the time a high number of Holocaust survivors that lived there. Now, for the first 10 years of my life, I was a Reformed Jew. Was definitely culturally Jewish, but we would have maybe a Friday night special Sabbath meal, but then, we'd watch TV. There was really not much religious. When I was 10, my mother remarried, and my stepfather came from more a traditional background. So he had the kosher home. So his house had the two sets of dishes, one for meat, one for milk. Didn't bring in outside food from non-kosher restaurants. So that was where things started to change when I was 10, because we moved into my stepfather's house, and his children were actually Orthodox. They didn't live with us full time, but they would be there every other weekend. And when they were there, they were observing the Sabbath, but we wouldn't. So it was a very blended household. And I will say overall, there was pretty good mutual respect. If I was watching TV in the bedroom, my stepbrother, who I shared the room with at the time, wouldn't come in while I was watching TV. However, if he was in the bedroom first, it would be inappropriate for me to come in and turn on the TV. So there was actually a decent mutual respect. But, I would be going to Hebrew school. And that was something I did even as a kid before that from kindergarten. But at first it was maybe one day a week. But once I got older and we moved in with my stepfather, it was happening 3 times a week. I think it was like Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday for a couple of hours. Would have what is called Hebrew school, but the actual learning of Hebrew is very negligible. It's mostly about Jewish history, and especially under the age of 13 is where they're preparing you for your bar mitzvah. So they're teaching you how to read Hebrew, but not actually how to speak Hebrew. You're learning a lot of history, culture, and, I did have friends in this, so it wasn't that big of a thing. And a lot of it was just kind of, so I would eat non-kosher food outside the house, but, I couldn't bring it back into the house. So I could go out to eat with my friends to, McDonald's, eat my cheeseburger, eat whatever. That was fine, but I wasn't allowed to bring it back into the house. So it didn't really impact too much my life for the most part at that age. There wasn't really a lot. We would go to synagogue on the Sabbath, especially when my, step siblings were there. And there would be things like the synagogue was about a mile away, and we would walk there because you're not allowed to use a car. So even though I may have been in a car, earlier that day with a friend of mine, I'm still doing this thing where I'm walking to the synagogue because that's really, they didn't want to be seen. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't ride. And my stepfather was kind of, was not comfortable riding to the synagogue. So, it was a very mixed. And meanwhile, the rest of my family, as far as my aunts, uncles, all of them were pretty much, very liberal. So very mixed and really pretty open and accepting family and community.
It was in high school that you got involved in an Orthodox Jewish youth group, part of an ongoing outreach program. So tell us about this time and what it led to.
Well, it came to when I was in high school. It was really more for a social outlet that my parents wanted me to be involved in something. I mean, I wasn't an overly outgoing kid, wasn't involved in a lot of activities, and, suggested I try a Jewish youth group. I actually went to a Jewish youth group, a conservative one, and for one event, and the kids there were just very snobby and unwelcoming, and I just didn't feel comfortable there. And I actually had heard that they were, pretty snobby like that, but it was actually worse. I mean, somebody actually looked at my shirt and told me that the brand I was wearing was okay, that it met standards.
Okay.
So obviously that wasn't the place I wanted to be hanging out. But, there's still, my mother wanted me to be involved in something social, to have more of an outlet, which made sense. So NCSY, the National Conference of Synagogue Youth, which is a Jewish youth group, they would get the email list. I'm not the email, this is 1980. They would get the mailing lists from the synagogues of their bar mitzvah students. So of those teenagers who were turning 13, they would basically acquire the mailing lists, and they would send out flyers about their events. And so I received these and just kind of shrugged them off. Well, then finally my mother was pushing me to do it, and a cousin of mine from Israel, one of my stepfather's nieces, she actually was in the States for a year on a program of national service. And while she was there, she actually did some volunteer work with this group. And she told me maybe check it out. And she did warn me. She actually told me that, be careful if they are trying to get, she was religious, but she did say that their purpose is trying to get people to become more religious. But, that it's a good group. So I called up one of the names on the flyers, and I speak to some guy who was super friendly, nicest guy, and he was like, okay, we have this event, it was something fun. We have this event coming up. He's like, where do you live? I'll come pick you up at this time, bring you to the event, and take you home. I mean, basically leaving everything open. He took me there, introduced me to a bunch of people. They were all very nice, and I'm like, okay, this is a nice group. This will be good for me socially. So I started to go. And the way the group does things is it's a balance of completely secular events to get people in. And that's what this, like the usual teen stuff, roller skating, laser tag, activities like that, amusement parks. They would do those type of events. And at those events, they would keep the religion to a minimum. Those were only about having fun. Then they would have these Sabbath events. There was a couple of different kinds. There was the small local level ones, which may be like 30, 40 kids, staying, either sleeping at a synagogue or sleeping at, homes of people in a community. And they would do that. And then they would have 4 times a year these big conventions. And these conventions, when I was there, was probably about 150 kids. And these would take place in some other city. A couple of them, sometimes they were in hotels. Sometimes they were at, camps, summer camps that weren't being used. And these events are where they really would start the religion stuff, really push the religion. And it was in there, and they would keep a real balance of trying not to push things too much, but to make you do things to get comfortable with the religious experience.
Like a drip feed, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it definitely like that type of thing, just trying to get you to have some fun, come in. And then later I learned, there was definitely elements of, and I think the most, I want to say, and I'll probably make this clear later, the people who were doing this, I think, were sincere in what they were doing. But, later learning about like love bombing,
yes.
There was that type of effect. And I don't think these people knew that they were doing something like that. But there really was this attitude of let's make sure you have a good time. And that's what this group, I mean, they would not let the kid, if they saw you sitting around alone, you know, they would find some of the more active kids to get involved and pull you into the group. You know, they were closely watching. They did not let you just sit there alone. They wanted you to have a good time. And I think I liked that environment, and, you know, I felt comfortable, and I got involved. And so this was my freshman year of high school is when I first went there. My sophomore year of high school, I ran for a chapter board. They had positions where, you know, youth leadership, and I ran for the chapter board and was like chapter vice president. My junior year of high school, I ran for the chapter president. So I was president of the group, and a chapter was around a small local area. So probably, you know, 30, 40 kids. And then my senior year, I decided I wanted to run for the regional presidency. Now, I will say, I was never really getting so much into the religious stuff when I was there. I mean, it was nice. There was nothing that I hadn't seen in my home, so none of it was that unusual to me. But, you know, you'd go to these conventions, and this is where you'd hear at the conventions, you know, there'd be these points where they'd start praising the person who, you know, this person, you know, Joe Schmo has made the commitment that he is going to say a blessing every time before he eats a kosher candy bar. Or, you know, Sarah Frankel is going to, you know, keep one Sabbath a month. You know, they're like teasing out things like that. And honestly, I was never really going for that stuff. You know, I kind of just was there for the social, and, you know, had a good time being there and enjoyed things. And really, I mean, I put a lot of time in, you know, to the group, and I was really fine with that, but I never really was finding the thing. So my senior year, when I wanted to run for regional president, the regional director told me one evening that they made a new policy that you had to be willing to keep Shabbat and keep kosher in order to run for regional president. And I told him, I'm like, but the current regional president this year, she doesn't keep, I mean, I knew her. She went to my high school. Like, she wasn't religious. I'm like, what do you mean? She's not. And he's like, well, it's a new policy we're putting in place because we didn't like what was going on. And I'm trying to argue with him. He's pushing me. And finally I say, okay, I'll do it. And he's like, both. And I say, fine, I'll do it, because I wanted to run for regional president. So I said I would do it. And, you know, I kind of figured, okay, well, I'll do it, or, you know, no one will really know what I do. And keeping Shabbat, the Sabbath, that I actually started to do. But the keeping kosher, I was never really able to fully absorb that. There was just something about, I think, the habit that, you know, I think as far as the Sabbath, I think for me then it was like, okay, so I just stay at home Friday night to Saturday night. Okay, I can do that. But as far as the dietary, I think it was too hard for me to just break that habit of being able to eat what I wanted to eat. So I never really did that, but it never really came up. And towards the end of the year, you know, when he thought that I was all into the religion, he basically admitted that he did this because, you know, he knew that I needed that final push to, you know, actually make a move. And that was the reason why. But, you know, the thing was, at that point, I was okay with it. I said, oh, well, yeah, you know, because there actually is like a saying of the rabbis that if you come to do something if you start to do something for the wrong reason, you'll eventually come to do it for the right reason. And I just kind of shrugged it like, okay, so now I'm doing it for the right reason. Now I really believe this. And the custom, what is very common, this group, what they really push, and is that at the end of your year of when you graduate high school, to go spend a year in a yeshiva or a seminary, a Jewish studies program in Israel. This is really the ultimate goal of the group, because they know that that year in Israel is what is going to solidify your being religious or not. Even if you become religious in high school and start doing stuff, if you go off to a secular college, the chances of you keeping that thing are very unlikely. So to get you to go to Israel and spend a year studying in Israel is what their main goal is, because then they figure that the school in Israel will get the work down, they will get you in there, and they will get it solid. And so I decided my senior year, okay, I wanted to go do this year of study in Israel. And again, my older stepbrother and stepsister had done this year, so it wasn't an uncommon thing. My stepfather had a very big love of Israel, so so that really wasn't an issue for my parents or anything. It was something they were familiar with. I mean, some kids have some real struggles with their parents to do this, but for me, it wasn't an issue. And I thought, it'd be a nice experience to go spend a year. So go to Israel for the year. I went to this place that was a small school, probably about 50 guys. And that school was really designed for people coming from these kind of backgrounds, that were coming from a secular, it was a mix. It was either people who were coming from a secular background who, needed the basic skills to learn, or it was people who were kind of on the way out, who were in the Jew Orthodox school system, but were on the fringes and, could possibly be, going off the path. And it was a place for them to get, their ground before going on into the world. Okay, so they actually wanted me to take a second year and spend a second year there, because I think they felt that would really, get me even more religious. But I really wanted to get on with my life and my career. And I was going to go to Yeshiva University in New York. And they did not want me to go there because they felt that was too liberal. They wanted me to go to a much more serious yeshiva program. But bottom line was Yeshiva University was going to give me a year of college credits for my year in Israel, and I could graduate college in 3 years and graduate on time, which is what I wanted. I was ready to move forward with life and did not want to be. And Yeshiva University is actually a very good university. Honestly, it was better than any university I could have gotten into based on my high school grades. But it's a dual curriculum of Jewish studies and secular studies. And there's a few different Jewish studies programs. And the one that they told me to go to was what's called the Yeshiva program, which is the more serious learning style. However, I did not actually meet the standards for that program and was put into a more introductory entry-level program. And I was really upset by this because they told me I should be in the Yeshiva program at my school in Israel, but I sucked it up. I didn't really have a choice. And once I started, and I'm like, I actually like this. It was classes. It covered Jewish history, covered, a variety of topics. It actually was more interesting than just doing Talmudic studies all day. So, and it was a couple hours shorter of a program, which it was really funny because my roommate who I was at the school in Israel with, he was in the Yeshiva program. And after the first semester, he ended up switching over to the program I was in. So it was really just them trying to, manipulate again to try to push people into the more serious learning. So while I was in college, I started volunteering with NCSY. And they would fly me in basically for their main conventions, wherever those were. So about 4 times a year. Plus, like when I was home on summer vacation or something like that, I would attend. If there was events going on, I would show up. Then when I moved back to Chicago, after graduating college, I worked in finance, but I still continued to volunteer with NCSY for 10 years, a total of 10 years. I was primarily in a lot of the logistics behind the scenes stuff, the food, the room setup, things like that. But I would interact with the kids. And, looking back at it, there were things, there were certain ceremonies and practices that would go on in this group that, say we were at a hotel and there was possibly going to be hotel staff around, I would actually warn them that what you're about to see may look like a cult activity, but it's really just some religious event. That really, looking back, should have been a red flag to me. Yes. Looking back at it now that I said that, I felt the need to give people a warning. But, there was definitely parts of this activity that really pushed the line. We're talking, sitting around in a dark room with candles, singing slow songs, getting people into a trance-like state. A lot of things like that, which seem innocent enough, but once you really start exploring and learning, you start to see the origins of these activities.
Well, you found yourself back in Israel in 2001, where you worked for an American company, and this is where family life began for you. Isn't that right?
Yes, that is correct. In the end of 2000, I was kind of burnt out with my career and wasn't sure what route to take. I had visited Israel in February of 2000, just was my first time back since I was there for the year. Went just for a vacation and really felt connected with it there. Met some younger people who were living there, and was kind of at a stall with my career and my life, and decided that Israel is, always where I believed I wanted to live, that I believed there was a religious obligation to live in Israel. I was at a point in my life where I could just pick up and make the move. So I figured, let me go and try it. Worst case, I come back. So I decided, I remember it was New Year's Eve, 2000 to 2001. I decided I was going to do it that year. Told my family a couple of days later, and met with a immigration counselor that week and made plans to move there in July. I chose July because I wanted to have several months to prepare, and also there was a absorption program to learn Hebrew, and their session started like in January and July. So if I wanted to go to this program, and this was one designed for young single people, in their 20s, 30s. It was designed for that type of crowd that was kind of the time frame. So July worked out well. I had a good relationship with my employers, but there was stuff going on. So it gave me time to transition and give them a heads up as far as things with my work. So set the plan, moved there July 2001. Mm-hmm. This was when there was the Intifada, the second uprising. It got to a point where, suicide bombings were regular occurrences. I have friends who were wounded. I have a friend who was killed. Terror victims. Everyone in Israel actually does know a terror victim because the country's so small. But I felt I was doing the right thing. Then 9/11 happens, and I'm like, well, I studied finance at a college in New York. I could have just as easily been in the World Trade Center. So any of the risks of, the safety of Israel, that kind of got set aside after that. It's like, well, it's dangerous in America, so I might as well be here. Eventually got a job with a new American call center that was opening up there to outsource. Got a job there and really fell in, worked there, was moving up, got into management. And eventually around 2004, I met my wife. We were working together. She actually was in the same absorption program I was. We had met originally then, and we're just kind of acquaintances. Then she was working at this company. I mean, this was kind of like all of the Jerusalem English-speaking market ended up working at this company at some point, pretty much, at least. And what it was, so we got married in 2005. And we were living there. Everything was fine, but was starting to get the job there. I didn't know how much longer. And unfortunately, because I did start working in an American company, my Hebrew was kind of stale. So I had enough Hebrew to get by and work, but I didn't have the Hebrew level to actually work in Hebrew. So I was kind of stuck needing to work for companies that wanted an English speaker. And so I started looking for a new job and things like that. And then when my wife got pregnant, and we decided that we wanted to return back to America, that I thought my job prospects would just be better. And also so that we could be closer to family, with them having a grandchild, so they'd be closer to the grandparents. We just decided it was the best move. So we set a plan that we knew my daughter was going to be born in January, and we figured we'd give it like 6 months or so, and then we would move back to the States. Again, just Israel has national health insurance, so we just wanted to be able to deal with everything with the baby initially, with the health care and all that. So we thought, let's wait till she's about 6 months or so, and we'll move back to the States. So we moved back to the States. We end up going to Florida, where my wife is from. Now, I should say all along, as a male in a male-dominated religion, I mostly saw the good sides of, at least the positives of things. I mean, as much as anything is positive in these things, I saw things from the best possible angle. I was a white male born Jewish. My wife had converted before I had met her, before she moved to Israel. So I started to see a little of the reality of how converts were treated, like how people say that, a convert is the same. But, you still have to explain your backstory to a lot of people. Then with having a daughter born, it really made me start to question some of the things in religion about how women are treated, and how in Judaism, they'll use the excuse that it's because women are at such a higher level, but women have a lot less religious obligations upon them. And the reason is because it's expected that they're dealing with the children, so they don't have time to be dealing with these religious matters. So, between being more exposed through my wife and then thinking about how I want to raise my daughter and what world I want her to be in, it definitely had me starting to question things a little bit. But still, we moved back to the States. We ended up staying in Florida at my in-laws. I was looking at jobs all over the country pretty much. Trying to stay in call center management. But then this was 2007, and then 2008, the financial crisis, and the job market was just horrific. I just had a really bad timing on my international move. And we ended up, so I finally got some jobs working like telephone sales, telemarketing type, low-level jobs. And we go and we get an apartment near where there's the one Orthodox synagogue in Orlando, which was the Lubavitch Chabad. Now, Chabad is what's known as a Hasidic, which is a different type of ultra-Orthodox sect. And they are very big in outreach. And they're known for actually being very welcoming and open. And I had actually gone to their synagogue a lot when I was a teenager and through college, because that was the only Orthodox synagogue where I lived. And I had very good experiences with them. But I went to this one for the first time, and it just was not very welcoming. I went and introduced myself, said how I'm new to the area. I moved here to be near there, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, nice to meet you. And then where it really took a turn was before the high holidays. They actually, a lot of Chabad high holidays, this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that's a lot of the Reform and conservative Jews are sometimes referred to, despairingly as 3-day-a-year Jews, because they only go to the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So most synagogues require for you to go to their synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that you pay the membership to their synagogue and have tickets. If you want to go on a regular Sabbath, you usually can just walk in. But the high holiday, since they're so crowded, they usually have tickets. But Chabad, in my past experience, had always been free and open. But this place actually charged for tickets. Now, I was having a difficult time with, meeting my rent and buying food with the jobs I was doing, that, buying tickets for the high holidays. And so I contacted the rabbi and said, I want to, I've been coming here. I want to be able to attend the services. I'm not able to afford the tickets. And he goes, okay, well, we'd like to come meet with you and your wife. And they want to come to our house. We're like, okay. And that's where I think I really first experienced it's about, the questions about my wife's conversion. And as soon as they hear that, I can tell the tone. It's like this, so who did you convert through, and who's this? And, it just felt contrary to what I thought that everyone always said, that a convert is considered the same as a Jew. And I think it was really the first time that I kind of experienced it. But, it was like, this is the life I've known for so many years. And I was not willing to work on the Sabbath, which, living in, at the time, Orlando, Florida, obviously, amusement parks and hospitality are our biggest industry in the city. And not being able to work Friday night and Saturday night is a problem. So a lot of jobs were being eliminated on that. I wasn't even going to be able to do them for religious reasons. So, I think I was still doing stuff, but it was getting less about wanting to do it and more feeling the obligation of it.
Gradually, you began to experience doubts about the faith you grew up in. Much of these thoughts developed during your time in the Army. So tell us about that.
I had always been interested in joining the military. I thought about it out of high school, but it was kind of like my family was kind of like, it's not what we do. We go to college. I actually tried getting into the Israeli military when I was there. I was actually too old for them. Since I didn't have any specialized skills, they didn't really want me. So I started kind of joking with my wife, maybe I should enlist in the military. Maybe I should just enlist. Maybe I should do that. And then finally, one day after one of these lousy telemarketing days, I said, why don't I actually look at it? Why don't I take a look and see what the options are as far as being able to do this? So looked like this was, 2009. We had 2 wars going on strong. Army recruitment age maximum was 42, and I was 35. So I went to a recruiter and said, okay, I'm interested in doing this. And I knew that going into the Army, I would have to sacrifice religiously. I mean, I knew that, the certain things I could try to do, but I also knew that it's going to require a sacrifice. But there is in Jewish law, there are exceptions for, saving lives, national security. So I went into the Army and decided, when looking at jobs, I wanted to become a medic in the Army. There was 2 reasons for choosing medic. One, my grandfather was a World War II flight surgeon. So I always had military medicine was something that I had always heard about and was always very proud and impressed of my grandfather and his service. And so it was something that I'd known. And I also felt that, okay, if I'm doing medical, I can justify breaking the Sabbath because this is helping to protect people's lives. So I decided to become a medic, enlisted, knew I would have to make sacrifices, but figured I'll do what I can do, and I can justify it under the name of national security, and it's what my family needs. So February 2009, went into the Army, went to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I brought my religious articles with me. I knew that basically I decided I would keep a vegetarian diet since I wasn't going to be able to keep the strict dietary laws. I figured I'd be vegetarian because those would be less restrictions. And whatever they told me I had to do on the Sabbath, I had to do. It wasn't my choice. I mean, it was a lawful order. I didn't have any choice at that point. So I did that. But, I would try to avoid turning on lights. I would try to avoid doing things that I didn't need to do. But, eventually I just started, basic, I was pretty solid. But then when I was in Texas at my advanced training for my medic career, I just kind of, I would find excuses to do things on the, to be a little liberal here and there. And, just eventually was going on, got to my first duty station, Fort Carson, Colorado, and I was still trying to do things as much as I could. So, if the Army told me I had to be there until late Friday night, I was there till late Friday night. But, I wouldn't do something on my own on the Sabbath. In July 2010, July 2010, I deployed to Afghanistan. And while in Afghanistan, again, same thing, was trying. The first place I was at was a somewhat decent post, but there was still, it wasn't like a major one, so there wasn't really there was maybe a couple of other Jews. I actually tried organizing Jewish services myself and pretty much just would do my religious stuff alone. Occasionally would find another Jewish person, do something with them. But then I was sent off in December of 2010. I went to a very remote area of Afghanistan near the Turkmenistan border. And, there were the meals ready to eat. You actually can get kosher meals in the Army. I mean, it is possible. I would kind of eat a hybrid of those. When I was in this place in northern Afghanistan, we were with the Italian Army, and they love to add pork to everything, including like the vegetables. But luckily, because of the Islamic interpreters and stuff like that, they would actually put a picture of a pig, so knew what to stay away from. And I was doing things, but I would, I would casually try to forget that it was the Sabbath. Oops, I lit a cigarette. I'm not supposed to do that. Oops, I forgot. Oh, it's Friday. I forgot. Things like that. So I could tell things were getting weaker along that point. Come back to, redeploy, come back to Colorado. I re-enlisted when I was there to go to Walter Reed, which was the flagship Army hospital, to be a medic in the hospital. And I thought I was going to be living in Silver Spring, Maryland, where there was a nice Jewish community. And I'm thinking like, okay, I can be in the Army and live in a nice Jewish community. Well, a couple of weeks before I was supposed to go to Walter Reed, I knew Walter Reed was shutting down. But I was supposed to be relocated to Bethesda, Maryland, to the hospital there. Well, there was a last-minute switch that sent me to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which is in the same region, the National Capital Region. But the thing is where I wasn't going to be able to live in this place in Maryland. So I had to live in Virginia, But obviously, Northern Virginia is some of the most expensive rental market in the country. And, I wasn't going to be able to afford to live on a enlisted, lower enlisted housing allowance. I wasn't going to be able to live where the Jewish community was. And we just needed to find an apartment. My son was born shortly before I deployed to Afghanistan. So we had 2 children. We just kind of were sick of living in a hotel and things like that. So we just found an apartment where we could, and there was nothing really Jewish around there. And that was when we kind of said, like, we used to do things like for the high holidays, we'd maybe go stay with one of these Chabad places. And it finally happened that we just said, we can't do this anymore. We're not comfortable staying in somebody's house, having to be under their religious guidance. We can't do this anymore. And for the first time, I openly said, okay, I'm going to drive on the high holidays. I'm going to go to the services at the chapel, at the post. And those aren't exactly what I'm comfortable with, but it's better than nothing. It's free. I'm welcome in there. I can just walk in there without having to make any arrangements. And it was just a lot of that I decided to do. So I decided, okay, I'm going to start driving, to go to services. And they had a Sunday school that my kids went to. And it was very nice. I mean, the people there were very nice. It was a very mixed group because obviously it was all brought together because of the military. But, I found it very welcoming and I enjoyed being there and I felt comfortable. So that's kind of what we did. And around this time I started, was commuting every day to and from work. So started listening to podcasts as was common. And, I remember listening to, one I listened to was Tim Ferriss, and he had Sam Harris on as a guest. And I'm like listening to him talking about atheism, and I'm like, this guy is making sense. And, then went and found some other Sam Harris interviews. Started listening to Sam Harris's podcast for a while. Then my wife and I kind of went down this journey together. We kind of were along, which was where we were fortunate that we both were along the same lines. And, we started pulling up YouTube videos, watching, Richard Dawkins debate with some religious leader. We started finding, and the more we started thinking, it's like, okay, we definitely don't believe the Orthodox stuff. So, eventually we just kind of said, okay, we're not Orthodox anymore. There was never really a clear point, but it was just kind of like, we realized at some point, okay, we're doing a bunch of stuff. We're not Orthodox anymore.
You eventually left the army and returned to the civilian world, all the while looking back on your life and questioning Jewish orthodoxy and religious belief in general. So take us through that time.
While in Afghanistan, did deal with some trauma. While in Virginia, I was dealing with some serious mental health issues that were having a real impact on my life. And it also was the first time that I really started to try to think about what I really believe. And I started to question, what of this do I believe and why am I actually doing this? And, by the time I got out of the army in 2015, at that point I said, I'm not going to pretend anymore. I'm going to let my parents, I'm going to let my, close friends, I'm going to let them know I'm not doing really Orthodox anymore. Let them think what they want, but I'm not saying I don't believe, but, I'm not really going to be practicing Orthodox Judaism. And, finally we started, no problem. We'll go out Friday night. We'll drive on Saturday. We just stopped doing these things, just decided. But we still kept some connection with the Jewish community.
Thank you, Robert, for telling your story about leaving Judaism. In our next segment, We'll hear about your conclusions about tactics used by religious outreach organizations and cult-like behavior that you've identified. So until next time, thank you very much indeed.
And thank you very much, Mark, for having me. I appreciate it.